It's a quiet news day, so on today's show we are answering your iCave answers. I'm iCave Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring my bell. And the first question today comes in from Phil Rosaleek, and this is a bit more of a technical one. So, iCave answers. Hi again, Dave. This question is more for my wife. She's running Monterey on her 2017 iMac, and since upgrading, it has stopped announcing the time on the hour. Neither of us has found where it's hiding. Have they removed it for Monterey? It's not something that I've used in the past, but it is a feature that macOS has had. It was one that I was aware of, so it might be that it's been moved, but I managed to find it for you. It's in System Preferences, and then you go to the date and time icon, go to the clock tab at the end, and then at the bottom of the screen there, you've got announce time at the bottom of that sheet. So you can decide whether you want it to be on the hour, every half hour, or every 15 minutes. Quite a handy little trick if you're trying to keep track of how much time you're spending on different activities. If you're trying to schedule out your day, that could actually be really helpful. Next up, Dante Burita asks, iCave answers. It seems to me that the M1 Pro and M1 Max SoCs will not fit in a Mini, so I expect the next Mini to be an M2 and released with the MacBook Air. Thoughts? I've said in the past, I think that the reason that this has been delayed, I think, is probably to do with getting the thermals and everything working in there, but there's absolutely no reason that the M1 Pro and the M1 Max SoCs wouldn't fit in a Mac Mini. The volume inside that thing is going to be a lot more than they have to work with a MacBook Pro, to be completely honest, and they haven't got to put in batteries, they haven't got to put in any of that other stuff. I would guess they're also going to make the power supply external, as they've done with the other stuff, so that also frees up a big chunk of space on the inside. It seems that Apple, especially with the iMacs and everything else, has kind of just decided that external power supplies are fine now. And also based on the renders that we've seen, it has got that same magnetic power connector that the iMacs have got. That very much suggests that we are going to have an external power supply for this. So I don't think there should be any problems with fitting it inside. I think it's either, number one, production capacity and the issues that they had over in China where they've had power outages and that kind of thing. I think it's just been delayed from that side of things more than actually technical issues with the Mac Mini itself. Mein Deutschkurs asks, iCave answers, when will we get the choice to install real macOS on iPad Pro M1 and later? I can't see any problems except Apple's decision about this. And you're right, the hardware is there and it is powerful enough to do it. When do I think it will happen? Not in the next 5 years. I really don't think that Apple has any intention of putting macOS onto an iPad. It doesn't make any sense. The interface is not set up for it. Touch targets would be far too small based on what you can do on an iPad. The hardware isn't limiting the iPad in terms of what it can run. What's limiting it is the fact that this display is set up for touch. And yes, you can attach a keyboard and trackpad to it, but then just get a MacBook. Like, if that's what you want. If you want to have an iPad, which is going to be touch sensitive, it's going to have the Apple Pencil support, that's fine. Have that. But these are two different devices. They're designed to work in different ways. I don't feel like Apple has any real intention of having the two mixed together particularly. Now, what I do think will happen is that we'll get a lot of apps that will work with both, but they will need to have different interfaces. They'll need to have different ways of interacting. But I think the operating system itself, the iPadOS and macOS, will become more similar behind the scenes, but I think the interface is always going to be different. The display size on an iPad Pro or an iPad just isn't like big enough to have multiple apps overlapping on the screen and be useful. It would be a terrible user experience. I don't really care what anyone else says. I don't believe that until Apple comes out and shows me a way that it can work. I think the way that they've got it right now for multitasking with the split screen mode is probably the best solution. Next up, another iPad one. James Apple asks, will the iPad Pro have the M1 Pro chip if the base MacBook Pro should get an M1 Pro? iCave answers. I don't see Apple putting the more powerful chips into the iPad, and the biggest reason for this is going to be battery life. So Apple, from day one with the iPad, has always touted a 10-hour all-day battery life. The M1s just about make it to that. The M1s are having a lot more trouble than the previous generations have with that same size of battery. So I think if we are going to get an M1 Pro in there, which I really don't think we will, I think M1 is absolutely enough for the iPads, and right now is not being taken advantage of in the iPads. But if we were to put an M1 Pro in there, it would have to be thicker to put more battery space in there. You're going to need more of a cooling system. I don't think you can passively cool an M1 Pro. I don't think that's going to be effective. So for my money, I don't think it's happening. I don't think we're ever going to get an M1 Pro in an iPad. I don't think we need to. It's not running multiple apps that are using a lot of processing power at the same time, which is kind of where the power of these comes into its own. For me, it's not required. Also from James Apple, when will the podcast be available on Apple Podcasts and other podcast channels? Hashtag iCaveAnswers. So yeah, many of you probably aren't aware, I do a podcast every Monday with Saran Bites. We've been doing this for about 5 weeks now, I guess. So we started it up just around the first iPhone event. We had a couple of weeks off just to iron out some technical issues that we were having. We're still having some technical issues, but it's kind of fun regardless. And we do it at 9 p.m. UK time, or UTC now, on a Monday night. We do it as a live stream on YouTube on the 941 podcast channel. And if you want to join us, that would be great. We normally have, 10 people or so, but we have a good chat with people, and we answer a lot of questions on that show as well as covering like the week's news. About it coming to podcast platforms, if you search on iTunes, you can actually find my podcast, which was the original kind of version of this YouTube channel in an audio format, and that's going to be replaced with it. So what we were doing was waiting until we'd got a little catalogue of like 6 episodes, so people can kind of look back if they want to, but it will be coming to the podcast platforms probably this coming week. And James Apple asks, would you be surprised if the M1 Mac Pro isn't modular like the trash can Mac Pro? To be completely honest, it is Apple Silicon. I don't really expect there to be very much modularity to it. I think there might be extendable SSD slots. That might be one of the few things, so we might get M.2 slots added to it, but I don't think it will be to replace the internal SSD. I think there will be a kind of included SSD that is not replaceable, but there will also be M.2 slots potentially on the boards. I think there's potential for it to be kind of a 2-card system where each card that slots in has got 2 M1 Max SoCs on it, or whatever we're on by the time we actually get to these things. That makes sense. So you would be able to kind of add an extra SoC. So if you bought the 2 SoC version, for example, with 20 cores, you would be able to add an extra one of those cards into it to add another 2 SoCs to bump it up to the 4-card version, the 4-slot version. That's the kind of the potential that I see for it. And in my head, and this is completely my opinion and not based on rumours or any sort of leaks, but in my head, it seems like it would be like plugging in a cartridge into an old computer console. That feels like kind of how Apple would do it, and you wouldn't even have to open the box up. It would just be a case of it slots in the back. And maybe we have a cartridge that comes out that you open to add those M.2 drives as well. They just slot in on their own high-speed bus. This is the kind of way that I would see them doing it. The other option would be like an old-style hi-fi stack, where you get Mac Mini-sized components that sit underneath it and have a high-speed bus cable at the back that would basically connect the individual items in a stack. That could be quite cool because it would almost make it more like the PowerMac G4 Cube in terms of the height, and maybe it goes into its own special case that you can fill up with these modules. I don't know, but that's a possibility if they wanted to make it extendable. But this is also Apple we're talking about, so it might not even have any upgradability to it. It might be that you just buy the high-powered M1 Pro, whatever they call it by this point, because the names are getting really confusing. I need to do another video where I fix all of Apple's names. But that's it for this show, guys. We've got some stuff coming up this weekend. I'm out doing a big event again on Saturday, so don't expect to see much of me there, although you might see me throwing some bottles around on Instagram and Twitter. Sunday, I'm back here, so we might do some stuff on Sunday. We'll see what happens. We are achingly close to that 10,000 subscribers. Everything's slowed down because there's no news, which is why we're doing this show today. So if you haven't subscribed already, I would so appreciate it, because it does unlock some features for me on YouTube when we hit that mark. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.